Hey guys, it's Camera Review for Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And what Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is essentially about is we center on this group of friends, and basically one night on Halloween, when they are playing these pranks on this bully, they end up meeting this new kid, Ramon, and they end up inviting him to this haunted house that they've heard things about. They stumble across this book of scary stories by this entity known as Sarah Bellows, this woman that seemingly died in that house, and so they obtain this book, and very quickly after the deaths that they start to read and the stories, they start to come true, and they very quickly realize that this book is clearly haunted, and all of them are pretty much set to die, and they have to do what they can to try to prevent it, and that's really all I'm going to say. So, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, I was very excited for this movie. This seems so creative and fun, and look, Scary Stories, I'm not that familiar with this book series. I've known what it is, but I've never really read a bunch of the classic stories and things like that, so while I was excited, it's not because I'm a huge fan of the books. I was more into Goosebumps and things like that when I was younger, but admittedly, this is definitely something I was interested in, and I think that there was definitely a lot of potential here, especially with Guillermo del Toro being on board and things like that. I was really hoping this could be a really great late summer entry, and for the most part, that is what I ended up getting here. Though this film isn't as good as I maybe wanted it to be, this is still a very fun film overall that I do think, for the most part, does get the job done quite well. And we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And for the most part, that is definitely one of the best things about this movie. I think the cast here does work quite well overall. Easily the big standout is Zoe Colletti as the character of Stella, who I thought did a really great job in this movie. I've seen her in smaller roles in some things before, but this is really the first role where she's kind of rose to prominence, and I thought she did a really great job here. Stella is someone who is very interested in horror and things like that. It's something that she really has invested a lot of time, but she also really does care about her friends, and when these things start happening, she's the one who really is quick to figure out what's really going on, and I thought that she had a really nice character arc as well, and overall, I just really liked her in the film. She's very likable. She really does have some standout work, particularly in the third act of the film, and I do think she is going to go pretty far. After this film, I definitely do want to see her in more stuff, and I think she did a really good job here for the most part. And the rest of the cast also does do a really good job. Michael Garza, I thought, was very good as this character of Ramon. I thought he had some really great standout moments for sure. Him and Zoe Colletti have some really nice chemistry there. I really liked Gabriel Rush as Augie. Not in the movie all that much, but he definitely does do a really good job when he's on there. He's definitely the most pessimistic of the bunch, but he's a very entertaining character, and I thought he definitely did a really good job. Dean Norris is always great, and for his limited screen time, he still does do a very good job here for sure. I thought Bellows was pretty good. The only two actors that didn't really work for me in this movie are the Steinbergs, the siblings of the Steinbergs. They just weren't very good. Austin Zajur as Chuck, he's supposed to be like the comedic relief in this movie, and it just doesn't really work. It felt very forced in that way, and he just didn't really feel like a very experienced actor, and he just did not have that natural ability that he really did need. And then scenes where it's supposed to be dramatic just didn't really work as well as they should. But easily the worst performance, I would say, in this movie is that of Natalie Ganzhorn as Ruth. She was really bad. Now look, she's not in this movie a lot, thankfully. But whenever she was there, I thought she was terrible. She's just playing the stereotypical sister and things like that, who's really mean and rich and very uppity in that way, and is more popular than all of them, and she thinks that what they're doing is really silly, and she doesn't have time for their nonsense, and I just really didn't like her very much at all. The only scene that really works for her is the scene you've seen in the trailer with, the bugs, the zit bugs or whatever. That's the only scene that really works for her. Other than that, I thought she was really bad, but most of the cast here does do a really good job. I thought they did work well together overall, and they did what they needed to do pretty well for the most part. But now let's get to the directing and the writing, which now we start to get into some of my more negatives with the film. The directing is definitely not one of them. I've heard a lot of people say this movie feels very tonally confused, like it doesn't really know who it's for. And no, I think it's pretty obvious. André Øvredal knew exactly who this movie was for. Yes, it definitely does have some, kid humor in there, but he clearly is trying to target this towards older kids. And, the kids that maybe they've, watched things like this before, but they're starting to get a bit older. They want to watch some more mature stuff, so they gravitate towards this. And I think that's very much the target audience there, and I think he does a really good job with that. The movie does fluctuate quite often between, some really fun moments with the kids, and then leaning into some legitimately really creepy horror scenes. And I thought he did a really good job with pulling that off, and I thought his directing here was very well realized. You could tell that he had a real passion for this series, and he wanted to pour as much as he could into it, and I thought he did a pretty good job here. Now, the writing as well, I thought was definitely pretty good in this film overall. The main mystery that we are dealing with here, I actually did get pretty into what's going on with Sarah Bellows and, why she's doing what she's doing when we start to get into it. I actually did think that was pretty good overall. And like I said, the characters overall are quite likable, though that does lead me to my one biggest negative with the film, is that although I like some of these characters, I just did not feel I got to know them as well as the movie may have wanted me to. The only character that felt really consistent in terms of a full-fledged arc is that of Stella. Not just because of Zoe Colletti's performance, but I thought she, out of everyone, she actually felt like she had a well-defined arc where she has this thing where her mother has died and she kind of blames herself for it, and so she's kind of going through that in the movie, and I think they did a good job with that. But all the other characters, there just isn't a lot to them. Chuck is just kind of like the funny guy who will crack a lot of jokes and say a lot of obvious things and things like that. And then his sister, like I said, she's just the popular girl that's in the, the play at school and things like that, and there's not really a lot going on there. And honestly, this would not be a complaint if this wasn't a movie when the characters are dying, but they're not just dying. Each of these stories that are being told hold some relevance to some fear they had as a child, and I felt like this could have made for some really good emotional material. Like, we get into some fears or something that they dealt with before that they thought that wasn't in their life anymore, but now it's come to resurface. They could have done some really good stuff there, and they really don't. And I just thought that the characters here could have been a lot better, and they do try to give stuff to some of them. Like, they do give some stuff to Ramon in the third act of this movie, but it does feel quite shoehorned in, and that really is my main complaint. Just when these characters died, while I appreciate them, and let me tell you, each one of the deaths are fantastic whenever they do happen. They're so well done. I'll get into that in the cinematography and things like that. But as good as they were, I didn't really have that emotional investment that the movie wanted me to, and that's also because a very good portion of this movie does feel quite rushed. I mean, right from the beginning, we're just kind of thrown into this circle of friends. There isn't really a lot of time to get to know them all that well, and while that wasn't a huge problem for me because I was overall invested in the story, again, I just wish I knew these characters a little bit more. So that did slightly hamper the film for me. It remains entertaining throughout, but I just want a little bit more to this narrative. Again, once we find out what's going on with Sarah Bellows and the actual, deaths start, that's when it really gets quite interesting. But I won't lie, it definitely did take a little while for me to get fully invested just because of how rushed some of it really did feel. I mean, there's even with, Stella, as good of a character as she is, there is a whole exposition scene, and I'm not just talking about a scene where, like, you see something happen. No, they have two characters literally stating every single thing that she's going through, and it just feels very unnatural in that way. For the most part, the dialogue is really good, but that's one of the moments where it does get a little clunky at points, and that just didn't really work for me. So yeah, the writing, while it was fun, it definitely isn't as well written as I think it could have been. I think they definitely could have polished it up a bit more, but it still, like I said, was entertaining overall. The cinematography, though, is easily, I think, the best thing about this movie. Aesthetically, this film is so well done. I think they did some really cool stuff with that for sure. Just the locations, they feel very lived in that sense, and you really do feel like you get a good sense of the time period. But it really is all of those deaths. They're all so creative. And that's what I really love about it, is that I know that a lot of this is coming from the scary stories, but a lot of the time what ends up happening with those is that things that work on paper don't really translate well to live action. That's not the case here at all. Each one of them are so well done and very creepy to think about. And they do some really cool stuff, especially when it comes to the character known as, the character known as this entity known as the Pale Lady. Oh my god, that whole sequence, I mean, I was pretty much on edge. I thought that was such a great sequence the way they did that. Or Harold the Scarecrow. I mean, all of these things we get to see, they definitely feel very well done here, and I really enjoyed the way that those scenes were implemented, and just the look and feel of this movie. Definitely the cinematography is a huge standout throughout the entire film, and I think they did a really good job with that for sure. And like I said, it's really impressive how well they were able to translate this. And nothing really feels like CGI. Like, it's pretty obvious that, yeah, this isn't practical effects, but it works for the most part. Nothing feels like an effect. These things feel tangible, and they do a good job with that overall. So I was very impressed by that here. The score as well, I definitely did enjoy. Nothing remarkable, but I definitely did like the way it was done. And the editing, like I said, this film definitely does feel quite rushed. It just kind of rushes into things here and there. And so because of that, while the third act I was very invested in, I just felt like I could have been more invested if they had take more time. And like I said, for like Ramon, he doesn't really get any character development until the third act, and it just feels very shoehorned in that way. And also, the way the movie ends isn't particularly satisfying at all. It feels very sequel baity, and I just don't really know what else they can do. Like, the idea of what they're setting up doesn't really sound interesting to me. Then again, I've said that with a dozen horror sequels, and they've turned out quite well. So maybe that's not the case, but just as it is right now, I don't really see what else they can really do with this concept. I feel like they got everything they could out of it. So overall, while I do think this movie is heavily flawed for sure, I still had a really good time with Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. It's very entertaining. The cast, for the most part, definitely does do a really good job. The deaths are all fantastic. The way they're filmed, I mean, they really did a good job paying tribute to this series that I don't really have a personal connection to, but I feel like for people that do, they're going to be really impressed for sure. Zoe Colletti and Michael Garza do a very good job carrying this film for sure. It definitely has a very interesting premise. I think it's good for kids and adults alike. It definitely does have some clunky dialogue, and I do think it was a little bit rushed. But overall, I still had a very good time with this film. So I am going to give Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark overall a B-. So overall, guys, in my review of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, let me know what you guys saw this movie overall. Love your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.